Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to talk about protecting your assets from lawsuits. And I'm going to go over some very big generalities and get kind of specific for you. Break it down bit by bit so you really get an understanding of what you're allowed to do and what you can't do. So number one, whenever you're talking about asset protection, you really need to be aware of things about fraudulent transfers and voidable transactions. What that means is I need to be proactive in my planning. I cannot be doing actions after I have a liability and still protect my assets from that. Both you and anybody who helped you set up a plan could actually be held liable. In fact, there's been multiple cases where the attorneys who helped in post-creditor planning, in other words, I know that I owe somebody money and I'm secreting those assets away, were held responsible as well. And it ended up in a lot of hot water, in millions of dollars in one case of exposure just because they helped somebody. So this is number one, is it needs to be proactive. Number two, we need to be focusing on something called inside liability and outside liability whenever you're talking about any sort of asset protection planning. So here's how I'll explain it. I'll put a little box up here. And something may occur inside that box, and we want to isolate it inside that box. So let's say that you have a business. For my purposes, I'm going to say it's Toby's Plumbing. So I put a plumbing business in there. So I'm just going to put biz. And I am a horrible plumber. In fact, not only am I a horrible plumber, but I am a forgetful, horrible plumber. And so I put in some plumbing in somebody's home, and I forget to connect all the pipes together and solder them together or glue them together. And so all of the pipes just spray water. And so I set up their house, I walk away, they turn the water on, and they go, everything's going honky-dory until the water is gushing out the walls and realizing that their house has been destroyed from the inside of its walls. And now they're looking at millions of dollars of damage in some cases. Actually, I'm thinking of one case off the top of my head where they literally did just that. They forgot to glue some parts, and the parts came apart. The pipes ended up flooding into a house for 3 straight days while people left for the weekend, and they come home to this beautiful home that has literally become a fishbowl. And guess who's on the hook for that? Hey, it's me. This is inside liability to that business. So I want to make sure that that business stays inside those 4 walls. If I do not have a business entity, there is no wall. I am personally responsible. So if I step over here and say, I am the business is me, Toby's Plumbing, I am personally responsible. In fact, they could follow me around for the rest of my life. They could even try to garnish my estate. They could garnish my pay I receive from anybody else. So that is why whenever you're doing an activity, you look and you want to isolate it. That's called inside liability. Outside liability is things that I do. So here's me driving my car, or better yet, I'll make it my daughter who's driving the car, and she hits somebody, and they're not happy. They're like, hey, it's back. And they're really upset. So they sue. Can they take my business away from me? That's the question. If there is no box, absolutely. If there is a box, possibly. It depends on the state you're in. And I don't mean mental state, I mean the actual state. Are you in Washington, California? Are you in New York? Is this a business? Where is it located? Is it Wyoming, where they can't take your stuff away? And that is outside liability. So we have inside as our example, and we have outside. And a good asset protection plan is going to address both of those things. They're going to protect your assets in your business from you, and you from your assets. Now, this is the part that sometimes trips people up. Not all assets are created equal. So, for example, I might have stocks and I might have real estate. You're going to say, stocks, I'm not worried about inside liability. I'll just hold them in my personal name. And remember, you get in that car accident, what are they taking? there is nothing stopping them from taking those stocks. So we need to put a box around those stocks to prevent somebody from taking them away from you in the event that you have exposure. Now, real estate creates liability just by owning it. So real estate, if I don't have a box, it's coming after here, it's coming after here, it'll even come after here if they could. Let's say you have a tenant and they say, mold, I got affected by mold in your rental. We want to make sure that we keep those in there so when they try to come out, it bounces right back in and stays inside there. We do not want any of these to be able to be reached. We want to keep the asset isolated because it is a risk asset. So businesses are risk assets. I am risky. There's nothing I can do about it. There's like literally, I cannot just go lock myself in a room. There's still exposure I could have, right? If I have children, right? I'm always going to have exposure. So I need to be looking at outside liability when it comes to me, making sure that I don't get things taken away and that I have them in a protected area before anything ever happens. Because again, you get into a car accident. I've had this happen so many times. People call you up. What do I do now? You can't do anything now. Like, you cannot move assets outside the reach of a known creditor. I could be held responsible, other people, like it becomes really messy. What you could say is, what's the total exposure, and we'll keep that much asset so we don't prejudice these people, and then we will do some things with the other assets, but I cannot move an asset outside away from the party that you hurt at that point. Now, I can do it beforehand. We could say, let's set up your estate and your asset protection plan in such a manner to where there's outside liability from things, not because we're trying to prevent creditors from getting paid, no, for a number of reasons, including estate planning, tax planning, business planning, and just being smart by isolating out the exposure and the liability. And as a benefit, I also have this outside protection. If I do this ahead of time, let's say that I had real estate, stocks, and a business, and I got into that car accident, at least I have walls around it to protect it. If I'm using the correct states, like let's say I'm using Wyoming for anonymity and for charging order protections, or I'm using Nevada for an asset protection trust or whatnot, they may not ever be able to reach those assets. And that becomes really, really critical. On the second side is that inside liability. Hey, I want to make sure that my personal, let's say it's my house, I don't want them to take my house. Maybe I have an IRA, I have a car, other things. Maybe I don't want them to be able to take those things away. So I isolate out my liability. So if I have a business, I'm like, hey, I don't want to be personally exposed to that business. I want to keep the business liabilities inside that box. I want to keep my real estate inside that box. I want to keep my stocks. Well, I don't care because the stocks don't create liability, so I'm not too worried about them. I'm just isolating them from me. But I've now isolated my liabilities and kept myself protected. Now, whenever I do a plan, I want you to think of three things. There's the big ones. There's the state, and I mean, like, where am I setting this up? Am I setting up a statutory entity? Am I setting up something like an LLC? Am I setting up a corporation? Am I setting up a trust in a state? Is there a statute? Am I using common law? The state, there's third parties. And when I'm talking about third parties, I'm thinking about banks, I'm thinking about judges, I'm thinking about angel investors, I'm thinking about auditors, here comes the IRS, and I want to make sure that I document my plan in such a way that I'm honoring and that they're giving credence to it. I worked for a judge who once would say, the amount of respect I show something is the amount of respect you show something. So if I set up a business and I go online and I incorporate somewhere, or set up an LLC, and that's all I do, and I have crappy documents, don't expect a court to really, they're just going to ignore it. It happens over and over and over again. The operating agreement has horrible provisions where it's 3 pages or 5 pages, and it's nothing that a reasonable business person would do, so they go, oh, it's you. When in doubt, they just make it you, and they're just going to ignore it. So there's the state, there's third party, and then here's the big word, taxes. There's also the feds, and whether or not the feds are going to treat it as maybe as a corporation, maybe as a partnership, maybe it's going to be ignored for tax purposes. You're going to be treated as a sole proprietor if you're a business, or if you're setting it up and holding it as such, maybe a real estate, you might be ignored and goes on your page 1 of your Schedule E, or it's a partnership and goes on page 2 of your Schedule E. All of those things, we are in control of these. And the reason I'm bringing this up to you is because when you're setting up a plan, each one of these boxes needs to be considering each one of these 3. So if I set up a business, I want to make sure that I'm setting up something with the state. Like maybe I'm setting up a corporation in a state, and I might be doing it because I want to be able to sell it and never have to pay tax. Maybe I'm setting up a C Corp from a tax standpoint, and I'm drafting really good bylaws, but I want to make sure that I'm hitting all 3 of those when I'm setting up that business. When I'm setting up my stock business, you know that there are ways to actually get tax benefits, even though it's an investment account that you can't get personally, but there's a way to structure things. Maybe we just tie these guys together and make them into a partnership, and now I can get some tax benefits too. It all comes down to, you guessed it, how you draft it, what you're using. Is it a partnership? Is it ignored? Is it disregarded for tax purposes? And if I want the IRS to honor it, if I'm ever in an audit, which hopefully you never are, but if I was, I want to make sure that my documents specify this is the manager, we're a partnership, and I can reimburse the manager for expenses for that business. Things like that. That all comes out. So I have to be looking at those 3 things. So when it comes to asset protection and setting up a plan, I hope you realize it's about inside and outside liability. It's about your timing, setting it up before there's a liability. So if somebody says, when's the best time to do this? Yesterday, right? Or right now. Setting something up before there's a liability. Well, I don't need it yet because I don't have a big business. It doesn't matter. That liability can follow you around forever. So, you set up the same business. I set up Toby's Plumbing, and I don't have any money. It doesn't matter. They can still go after me, and they can renew that judgment every 10 years. And if I ever end up with money, guess what they're taking from me? The money that I make. Ask me how I know that, because I've actually collected on those, right? And then, I'm looking at my 3 things. So my timing, inside and outside liability, and then making sure I'm honoring the state, making sure I have good document, and making sure I am picking the proper tax. I know I just threw a lot at you. So here's my invitation to you. Anderson does repeatedly throughout the month something called a tax and asset protection workshop. I invite you to come to that. It's absolutely free, and you can learn about everything from Wyoming statutory trust to land trust to LLCs, corporations, S corporations, C corporations, LLCs, taxed as partnerships, LLCs, taxed as S corporations, LLCs, taxed as C corporations, how the taxes flow, and a whole bunch of other benefits, and also how it wraps up with your estate plan. We do that consistently throughout the month, so make sure that you take advantage of that, and hopefully you know a little bit more than when you started about asset protection and how to set your stuff up correctly.